Hi, tonight I'm going to share a very quick post um, about why we are in the chaos we're living through at the moment. Um, the short answer is that we have surrendered our power to those who feel they are controlling our lives. Whereas the truth is, the only power they have is the power we have surrendered to them or given up to them. We can control our own destinies. Before I go on, if I can ask you to hit the subscribe button, hit the notification button to support me in other content that I put out. So why are we in such a chaotic situation? Everybody's afraid about the next lockdown. In Australia, other parts of the world, lockdowns are to a penny. I think they've entered their fifth lockdown in Australia. Nobody knows whether there's going to be a vaccine passport for the experimental biological agent, which has no actual authorization by the authorities, and how any authority could mandate an experimental agent, which is literally just experimental, seems completely against the Nuremberg rules, which the whole of the world till now has run under. But here's the thing. The reason we are daily surrendering our authority is because of fear. Fear is driven by so many things. Firstly, the manipulation of the pandemic, so-called pandemic figures. The sources are all government sources. We don't know how true or false these figures are. They depend on a test which is itself controversial, but is as yet our gold standard for evaluating how many infections there are. Secondly, there's a matter of what's counted as a COVID death. Over the past year and a quarter or so, the standards for evaluating what is a COVID death have shifted from country to country and finally confirmed by the WHO. So if we keep testing very high numbers of positives, the government can say that, well, look, we've got so many positive tests coming out now, we've got to lock down. If the government says that all of these deaths have been classified as COVID deaths, we've got to lock down. It seems rational, but from all the available evidence, it seems clear that despite the so-called millions of people who have apparently died from COVID, the overall world death toll during the period of this pandemic has not spiked up significantly over any years that we have had before. Thirdly, it's a matter of censorship. If there is only one source of the narrative, if there is only one approved way of telling this story, if there isn't debate between authoritative figures, pro and con, the policy that we're following at the moment, how do we know what is true? You and I aren't microbiologists. You and I aren't biochemists. You and I aren't virologists. But there are many, many authoritative world figures who stand completely against the policies that are being enacted right now, and indeed the science behind it. And that brings me to my next point, which is the science. The science seems to be invented as we go along. I've read reports and I've watched videos from very authoritative figures talking about the body's memory of variants of viruses. And yet it is a very new viruses which are being discovered apparently all the time by different figures around the world that is causing The panic. Well, this new variant has been discovered. It's a lot more infectious. This new virus has been discovered. This new variant has been discovered. It's a lot more deadly than the one prior. You're going to need a booster shot and so on. So that the science doesn't seem to follow the logical path of much of the science. And above all, the science is internally peer reviewed by people we don't know. There has never been public debate between authorities who are avowed experts in their field and the authorities who are making our decisions now. Now, the policies that have resulted as a result of the censorship, the very mobile science, the infection figures, and the death figures has ended up in a place where people need to be wearing face diapers to protect themselves from this vaccine. Now, I am the last person in the world to use an expression like that, or would have been a year ago. Now, enough of this process has unfolded for me to start to lose faith in the so-called efficacy of some of the remedies that we're using, including the social distancing. And of course, if I put it that way, it would have to include the whole idea of the lockdown as well. Now, there's only one real advantage of being a certain age. That advantage is that you see many cycles of cause and effect run through. And the consequence of that is that you learn to join the dots. That's one advantage. Another advantage is that, by the way, some people have the perspicacity to be able to make those connections between disparate events much younger in life. But one thing that age gives you a far greater chance of being able to do is joining up these dots, because you've seen the cycles come and go. The other thing is that as long as your spirit is in such a place that a friend of mine called it your courage muscle, if your courage muscle isn't flexed on a daily basis, when you need it, it's a little bit like getting up and wanting to run the London Marathon from a standing start. You start off training for a marathon. I've seen friends do this with 2 km runs, 4 km runs, 5 km runs, 15 kilometer runs, and ramping up to the point where your body is fit for the job. If you don't have to exercise that thing that we call courage, which essentially it can't be taught in school. There isn't a theoretical basis for courage. Courage is something that you practice on a day-to-day basis, like bodybuilding. Once you take a viewpoint, once you develop your spirit to be one that is capable of facing adversity with some degree of equanimity so that you can give your best, you have a chance when the big test comes to be able to face it. This is something we have signally, most of us, not had the opportunity to do because we got bounced into this pandemic without any notice whatsoever. And what we need above all is the courage to rise above the fear that makes us behave like a herd of sheep at every new twist and turn in the science and every new announcement. Look, I've been in this situation, I've experienced it myself. When the Prime Minister gets up, flanked by his Chief Medical Officer and his Chief Science Officer, and you're literally thinking to yourself, God, no, not again. What are they going to come up with today? You get tired of it. Then in the media, the incessant bludgeoning of the population all heading towards a particular goal. It seems to me that the whole of this pandemic has had the goal of getting everybody to take that jab. And now they're suggesting that we need updates to those jabs. Look, you don't have to be over 50 to work out that something is off. But you could be 100 years old if you don't have the courage to sit back, if you don't have the spiritual strength to be able to observe scary information and work things out, your goose is cooked. The first thing you will do is to say to the government, look, what do you want me to do? And however absurd their solution, you will follow it to the T. Not only that, you may even demonize those who don't follow what the government says you should do, and it is happening here already. Everything boils down to fear. Now, I'm just checking my time, but there's one other thing that I think is very important. This is a global problem. And it seems to me, because I'm of African origin, it seems to me that Africans are lost in this conversation. I don't hear African voices being played out. I'd just like to remind everybody on the home continent that whatever is happening in one corner of the world is just a few weeks, a few months away from happening across the 55 countries of Africa. This is not a conversation you can check out of. The issues we're discussing here in London now, these issues aren't conversations these aren't just like first world problems, because they are coming to haunt you, and they are coming to haunt you extremely hard, very, very soon, if not, they're not there already. And the tendency, whether by accident or by design, is for Africans to say, well, look, we got lots of fish to fry. We got lots of big issues to solve with our economies, with employment, with healthcare, with this, with that, with infrastructure, with corruption, and so on and so forth. People will, the list is endless. But sometimes, to actually understand the problem in front of you, you need to look up and beyond that problem. Sometimes the solution to your problems lies in understanding what is happening on the global scene. This truth is something that will never, ever go away. In fact, I would argue that the very idea of thinking that, look, whatever is my immediate problem is my immediate problem. Let me tell you, all the immediate problems we had in the United Kingdom just evaporated like that. They completely evaporated when we met COVID. There were problems with Brexit. There were political problems between the Tory and the Labour Party. There were problems with our transportation issues. There were problems with even the environmental issues. All of that evaporated when the problems with the loss of human rights happened with COVID. And so, for my friends on the continent, I would say, please, one, enter the conversation. Please pay attention, because whatever we are suffering now in England, issues around courage, issues around fear, are issues that are, if they're not there yet, they are coming very soon. Thanks very much for listening.